This is the squirrel talking to the Buddha. And he's going, I want to have your peace, your wisdom, your serenity, your divine nature, and your acorn hat. Love squirrel. The squirrel has been corrupted by human desire for capitalism and consumerism and exploitation and greed. So if there's any one slide that you can take home with you, that's it. And I'm done speaking. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak today. Thank you, Mr. Davies. It's humbling to be around you all who have our environmental concerns at heart, because as a Jodo Shinshu Buddhist, I must admit that our particular temple, the Salt Lake Buddhist Temple, has been mostly engaged in dealing with the dark side of human nature, you know, with self-inquiry and self-examination. And there is a divide, it seems like, between working on the ego and translating that into some sort of environmental action. So I certainly admit culpability there. But in preparing for this talk, I had to psych myself into, you know, having a conversation with an environmentalist, and I must say I am really ashamed and embarrassed. And I don't know what I'm doing here. Just a little introduction to our temple. It is a Jodo Shinshu Buddhist temple. Jodo Shinshu is a form of Buddhism that originated in Japan in the Kamakura period when the peasants were rising against the nobility and the elite. And basically the message to the peasants here is that enlightenment is not just for monks and the nobility, it's for everybody. And this basically gave them the strength to rise against the establishment. But essentially the heart of Jodo Shinshu is really the cultivation of gratitude, of humility and gratitude through the practice of saying and hearing the Nembutsu. Nembutsu means literally name of Buddha. The Nembutsu is Namo Amida Butsu, which is pretty loaded, I guess. But it's a teaching that basically sheds light to the shortcomings of human beings, the me, and my own inability to enlighten myself. And so the only thing I can do is, in humility and gratitude, take refuge, Namo. I take refuge in the Buddha of infinite wisdom and compassion. But that's loaded, because then what does that mean, taking refuge? So Buddhist teaching really is very confusing. The more you get into it, the more, you know, I sink in the mud. But Thich Nhat Hanh said, you know, no mud, no lotus. I'm the minister's assistant there, and I didn't have a choice because my husband is the minister there, so. I also have a private practice in integrative psychiatry. Integrative meaning I have integrated a lot of Buddhist teaching and principles into my practice. And the MD after my name is not Doctor of Medicine, it is Major Debt. So what does Buddhism have to contribute to this buffet? Essentially, it's a buffet, you know, so you choose and pick what tastes good to you. And really, when you taste Buddhist teaching, it's very unpleasant. And it's really disconcerting. Makes you kind of wince, you know, and wriggle all the time. Because the heart of Buddhist teaching is all about understanding our suffering. It's essentially the first universal law about being human is that we suffer. We suffer continuously. We're never really happy. We're always discontented. And I think that has a lot to do with the way that our environment and our crisis has come to be, is because we always want something that's not there, and we don't want things that are there, and we can't do anything about it. And so to understand suffering means we need to really take a deep look at it, to be aware of our own suffering and to investigate what the big whoop-de-doop is about what we're upset about, and understanding this suffering, and then figure out how is this suffering going to be alleviated. Dogen, I think, was the one who said, he's the sixth patriarch of Zen, and he said that the study of Buddhism is not the study of Buddhism, it's the study of the self. And so really in that sense, Buddhists are really very selfish and very self-involved. But he also said that to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to negate or let go of the self. And to let go of the self is to become enlightened in all things. So there's a conundrum right there. How do you become enlightened? How do you let go of the self? And this is the only self you have. I mean, you can get rid of it, it's not, even if you commit suicide, you're causing suffering for all other people and all their humongous egos. And there's, 8 billion egos in this earth. Okay. The one criticism I do have about Buddhism as a religion is that there seems to be less concern for institutional issues, societal issues, ecological issues, because a lot of the focus is on self-assessment, and self-management instead of appraisal of other people. And so, when you see somebody doing meditation on a cushion and you're an environmentalist, you got to go, what are you doing sitting on that cushion? You got to go get up out of there and take out the trash. So why do we suffer? We suffer because we're attached to ourselves. And that's the problem, is that this is the only self I have. I mean, what else can I attach myself to, So self-attachment essentially is being attached to our views and being attached to our opinions and our ideas and our thoughts and my perspective. And, from my perspective, the only thing I can see is what's in front of me, maybe and all the way through what my peripheral vision allows me. I have no idea what's back there. What's back there? Oh, okay. There's a flag there. But from my perspective, because I have a very limited point of view, because the self is limited, I will tell you there is no such thing as a flag behind me. Honestly. And I am absolutely right, too, about it. Totally right. Okay. So the nature of the self really is very limited. One of my teachers said, Taitetsu Uno said that we are like elbows. We can only bend one way. And if we try to bend the elbow any other ways, we're going to break it. So this is the nature of our self, is that we are limited. And there's a good reason why we're limited. It's because, can you imagine 8 billion omnipotent human beings in this planet? Now that's scary. But that is a delusion, I think, that a lot of people have carried that's, I think, resulted in this crisis, that everybody knows what's right and everybody else is wrong except me. Okay. So in that sense, I think the understanding of the self is very important in Buddhist practice, because essentially ego is not good or bad. It's just something that, we have because somebody has to do the work, somebody has to wash the dishes and do the laundry and get up and make coffee and things like that. But at the same time, it's the same self that wants to take credit for all the good things that are out there. So when I accepted this invitation, I had to ask myself, okay, who's speaking, ego or non-ego? And I don't have a non-ego. All I have is an ego, so. Okay, so here I am. So one of the things about Western psychology is that, we have a great emphasis on building the self. And we have these terms like self-esteem and self-concept and self-realization and actualization and self-this and self-that. It's because this is the nature of the self. It's all about me. This thing that we call all about me is what we call the 3 poisons of the mind: greed, anger, ignorance. Or in short, we call it bonno as the Japanese term. Bonno in the Sanskrit term is klesha. Okay, are the poisons of our mind. So it's very confusing when, especially in the work that I do, Where in the Western field of mental health, we try to boost the ego, make it big and strong and steady, right? And, stable. In Buddhist psychology, if you will, the goal here is to shrink the ego to as small as possible and get it out of the way. It's a conundrum. So the goal here for non-suffering is self-relinquishment, which is, of course, humanly impossible. So there's the trouble right there. That's why we're stuck on suffering. So how do you get from self-attachment to self-relinquishment? Well, the Buddha taught that there's a middle way, so not too hot, not too cold, not too dark, not too light. The middle way basically has 8 aspects. Okay, right view, right thought, speech, conduct, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, meditation, but don't worry about that. I think the most important thing about this in our environmental crisis is what view do we take? What is the right view about this environmental crisis? And of course, there is no one right view, and there's the problem right there. So the only thing that I could really do to distill it into the simplest terms is, what is my particular view about this crisis? And am I assessing it accurately? Am I basing it on fact? Am I basing it on reality? And to tell you the truth, I really don't have a good idea, because we have all of this information. But information is not necessarily wisdom. And so the information has to be distilled somehow in my heart based on wisdom and compassion of Buddha. Can I be just like Buddha? Wise enough, kind enough? And of course not. I'm always going to be the squirrel. But we can still try. We can try. In the mental health field, we start with the mind. And in Buddhism, we start with the mind. The mind is considered to be the sixth sense, in addition to vision and hearing, tasting, smelling, and touching. And so the mind is dangerous. I heard somebody say that her mind is extremely dangerous. She said, "My mind is extremely dangerous. I never go there by myself." So from the Dhammapada, the words of the Buddha, mind precedes all mental states. If with an impure mind a person speaks or acts, suffering follows him like the wheel that follows the foot of the ox. If with a pure mind a person speaks or acts, happiness follows him like his never departing shadow. Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is law eternal. So the hatred, again, comes from the suffering, and that's why we see so much conflict in the world, is because everybody suffers. Somebody said that everybody's carrying on a great war in every moment. And I think part of the problem is that when we recognize our own suffering, it's easier to understand the suffering of other people. But, it's easier said than done, right? I am still absolutely right, and you are wrong. The other thing about the mind, especially in this symposium, is what does the mind consume? Because the mind is a sixth sense, it's a sixth organ, right? And that's basically how we connect with the real world, or the invisible world as well, right? So the mind essentially consumes, pretty much, just like the mouth consumes and the nose consumes. And so we have to ask, what is this mind consuming? What are we exposing our minds to? When we watch, a violent TV show, we are consuming that. When we are cultivating angry thoughts, we are consuming that. When we are thinking about divisiveness and righteousness and hunger, whatever we think about, whatever we feel, which is still a product of the mind, that's what our mind consumes. And so we have to come back into looking at, what is this mind cultivating in that sense? What is it feeding on? There's a big word now in Buddhism, it's called neuroplasticity. In other words, the brain that produces the mind, we think, is constantly rewiring itself based on what it is exposed to or what experience it is exposed to. In other words, neurons that fire together wire together. And so the more we are exposed to negativity, the more our brain will wire in that direction. And the more we cultivate, kindness and gratitude and humility, the more our brain can wire that direction that produces a mind that is also more humble and grateful. So this is the contemplative aspect of Buddhism that looks like you're just sitting there doing nothing. Really, we're sitting there too because we don't want to cause any more suffering than we already are. But then in doing that, we're still causing suffering. So it's like, okay, we're trapped. So in the spirit of environmentalism, I guess one thing, useful metaphor, at least for me, is to see my mind as a garden. And it requires daily cultivation because you have to pull those weeds, every day, right? And stick them in the recycler, composter, so that your flowers can grow. And so the mind assumes its own landscape depending on how much gardening we do. But the whole idea here is to garden in your own backyard. You don't dig up dirt in your neighbor's yard and, pull out their potatoes. I mean, you work in your own garden, right? And there's dirt there, right? There's dirt. And we got to have that dirt. And, of course, what does the garden feed on? Or what enriches the soil? It's manure, right? It's our manure and dead stuff. Okay. Decay. So talking about decay, the truth of impermanence is central, I think, to this concept, because one of the kleshas or the evil things that we think about is we hang on to things that we want them to last. We want our spouses to live forever. We want our kids to live forever. We want the car to last forever. But the nature of things is really decomposition and decay, essentially non-sustainability. So, that puts environmentalists, right, in this predicament. How can you sustain something that's unsustainable, such as life itself? But really, when we think about impermanence, when a good model there is to look at this idea of mindset, okay? How can a mind be set? I mean, it doesn't even have a form, It's nothing, it's nothingness. When you set your mind, it's like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. But the implication of that is that our mind can always change. And again, it depends on the cultivation that we do in our own garden. And therefore, we need to ask ourselves, what kind of garden am I going to grow this year? But with change, with impermanence, there's always hope. Things can turn around. But it really all depends on the individual effort that we put into it. The idea of transitoriness, of impermanence, I think creates a sense of anxiety because something disappears, something runs out, and it creates a sense of lack. We're missing something here. And so that could be part of the driving force that leads us to hoard and acquire and buy more and keep more and, go to these wholesale stores, right, and have like mountains of toilet paper so that we don't ever run out of toilet paper. But at the same time, it also makes us think about how this impermanence is really an opportunity for us to appreciate the preciousness of our life, the preciousness of this planet, that it's not going to last forever either. And so the appreciation that we live now in this moment, and this moment is gone, it's already the next moment, that maybe it can lead us to practice more restraint, more respect, more contentment, more gratitude. My husband told me, something, because he's done like all these funerals. He said that the best tribute to the dead is not necessarily grief, it's gratitude. Gratitude. So for all the species that have died because we ruined them, right? All the redwood trees that we cut and turned into toothpicks, gratitude. So when you eat your lunch today and you use a toothpick, think about the redwood tree that fell for your benefit. Or the tissue, we blew your nose in, that came from a tree somewhere. We pay respect to the tissue. Before we throw it away, we say, thank you for wiping my snot. Let go or be dragged. That dog is my bono dragging me to TJ Maxx. So that's a tricky one too, because what do you let go? Essentially, we try to let go of this ego, but you can't because, we're tied to this ego. It's our prison. It's our prison. So we let go of as much of our attachments as possible. That's the practice, and it's very difficult. But I think it's essential in this world. There's a Buddhist saying, want less, suffer less. So this is all about cultivating contentment and being discriminative about what we want to keep and what we need to let go. What did the Dalai Lama say to the hot dog vendor? He said, I'd like to have one with everything. So this brings the issue of interconnectedness, right? Interconnectedness. We are all one, all one. One of my Zen teachers told me before, alone, when you feel alone and you think you're just all alone by yourself, it really is a composite of two words, all one. All one. And so a lot of times our grief comes from our perception that we are separate. And that's what causes the divisiveness among us. And again, what keeps us separate is we are so convinced of our own righteousness. And if I'm right and you're wrong, then we are no longer in the same camp. And so everybody's wrong. At least that's from a Jodo Shinshu perspective. Everybody's wrong. Everybody has a bonno. Everybody has a self-centered ego that needs reckoning with on a pretty regular basis. And I'm reminded of Dr. Tucker's talk yesterday, Common Ground. We have a common planet, a common atmosphere, common universe, common vegetables and dogs and squirrels. One idea about interconnectedness, maybe that is very, personal, is eating an orange. It's, Buddhists like to eat oranges. I don't know why. But Thich Nhat Hanh particularly is big on oranges. And basically the idea here is that when we're eating an orange and we're really tasting the orange and we're noticing everything about eating an orange, we think about the farmer that planted the orange. We think about the rain and the clouds and the ground and the people who planted the seeds and the groomers and the bugs and the insects. And when we're eating an orange, the universe is in that orange. This is the idea of interconnectedness. When we eat an orange and we're really absorbed in eating the orange and we see everything that it took, all the hard work that's already been done for our benefit, so all we need to do is the easy part, and that is to eat the orange. We forget the self. And that is relinquishment, at least for the time being. And then, whoop, we're back again. It's like, oh my, I got this orange, and I did this all by myself. So one idea about interconnectedness also is the Hindu cosmology of Indra's net. Have you heard Indra's net? Yeah. Yes, of course. So Indra's net is really it's not internet, okay? It's Indra's net. It's a way of looking at our interconnectedness as sentient beings. And in a net, you have intersections, right? And each of those intersections is a jewel, a specific jewel with its own luster and its own brightness. But the idea is that each jewel also reflects the light, the luster, and the color of all the other jewels in this net. And therefore, each one jewel is, the preciousness of each jewel is magnified in the context of this whole net. We are here because we are joined together, right, in this interconnectedness idea. So our karmas have collided today. There's no collision insurance, unfortunately. But essentially, the idea of interconnectedness is that we're all in this together, and that's why we're all here. We're all in the same toilet bowl together also. Interconnectedness also means relationship between this self, this ego, and other. So you've heard about the Buddhist teaching of the finger pointing to the moon. The finger is not the moon. The moon is not the finger either. But without the finger, it's hard to see the moon. And without the moon, you cannot see the finger. You can only see the finger when it is illuminated by the light of the moon. So this is the concept of being able to see oneself in the light of wisdom and compassion. This is a quote from, this is a quote from the Dalai Lama. Am I over time?
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Oh, sorry, okay. We come into this world as a result of others' actions. We survive here in dependence of others. Whether we are aware of it or not, there is hardly a moment when we do not benefit from others' activities. For this reason, it is hardly surprising that most of our happiness arises in the context of relationship with others, nor is it so remarkable that our greatest joy should come when we are motivated by concern for others. So this is essentially the translation of interconnectedness in action. So the question is, are human beings at the top or at the bottom of the ecological chain? Aristotle said, there is, after all, an order to which man belongs by nature. Though some mistaken quirk of patronage has elevated him beyond it, this is the ego that's elevated human beings above all living things. And we need to question, really? How do we survive without tomatoes and bugs and spinach and air and sunlight? I mean, if we really look at the true nature of our existence, we are completely helpless and powerless. And we're trapped in this ego. Can't even escape. So the only thing that we could do is to recognize that we are on the receiving end. We're always on the receiving end of the ecological chain, and there's nothing left to do but to be humble and grateful for it. Mottainai, the shame of wastefulness. In Japanese, it means that when you leave something on your plate, you're wasting your food. But in Buddhism, Mottainai is the shame that we recognize when, in spite of our greed, and we consume as much as possible, like hungry ghosts, we cannot possibly consume all the oxygen in the air. We cannot consume all of the sunlight that still comes to us. We cannot consume all of the resources that the earth has to offer. That everything that surrounds us and takes care of us is more than enough, even much more than our own greed. This is Mottainai. Minding the earth. As a practice, cultivation of gratitude requires awareness of the self and the true nature of the self, investigating the self, understanding this true self, this pathetic human being that is completely dependent on the environment for its survival, and relinquishing this ego in the context of relationship with the other, with the environment, with people, with plants, with animals, with mountains and water. A practical application is Nikon, self-reflection, seeing the finger in the light of the moon. So when we're cultivating our garden, we can ask ourselves, what have I received from the earth today? For me, it's the coffee and the hot cocoa and the soy milk that were grown by farmers from wherever they come from. I have no idea. This is the mystery that goes beyond my own ability to see the truth. This is my elbow, basically, in my limited point of view. All I can do is appreciate what I'm consuming now because I'm doing the easy part. What have I received from the earth? What have I given to the earth? And most importantly, what troubles and difficulties have I caused the earth? In gratitude, Thich Nhat Hanh says, walk as though you're kissing the earth with your feet. When we are humble and grateful for this earth, for this planet, there is no way we can ever think about exploiting it again, or taking advantage of it again, or being greedy. The best thing that comes is now paying homage to the one thing that sustains us, and this is our environment, which is not self. Thank you very much.